boat claiming to be a Nigerian naval boat called the Hong Kong flag chemical tanker on VHF, and asked details of the tanker cargo, last and next ports in position of about 45 nautical miles south of Brass. This information was passed to the gunboat, and after around 15 minutes, the gunboat approached the tanker at high speed and demanded the tanker to be stopped and boarded. The master informed that they would not be stopping as it was in a high-risk area of piracy attacks. The gunboat threatened, fired 2 shots towards the vessel. The master immediately raised the alarm over VHF and requested ships in the vicinity to relay its message to port authorities, which took some time to get through. On hearing the alarm, the gunboat moved away. So this is quite significant in the fact that it's unusual for them to start taking these sorts of steps. Okay, so what challenges do we face to try and deter, counter and provide anti-piracy services in this sort of region? Okay, first and foremost, the compliance issues that we are used to and we're well versed with are even more difficult to comply with. As stated, no Western citizen is permitted to go into any territorial waters, particularly Nigeria, with weapons of their belonging, licensing and compliance to the UK and overseas laws. So therefore we must go in unarmed. The logistical clearances to provide our guys with safety and safety equipment again is now becoming restricted because of the authorities of the various airports and ports to cease movements of restricted goods through those ports. So again, that's a challenge to protect our own guys. Identifying reputable and correctly licensed companies within those countries who can facilitate the use of naval forces and armed guards that are required by the ship owners. The restricted use of our own legally licensed weaponry is an issue, especially within territorial waters. So for example, if we go to Cape Verde, where we may have licenses to store and move weapons and equipment, once we leave Cape Verde to provide our services through the Gulf of Guinea, and it's going to Nigeria, what do we do with our equipment? We're not allowed into territorial waters, we're not allowed into those regions. So it becomes a problem for us to facilitate that service. GuardCon compliance, the industry standard contract that we've all signed into with BIMCO and is pretty much widely recognised now, again raises some serious issues with regards to delivery of services in the Gulf of Guinea generally. Which then comes to the complications if we are going to use third-party service providers, i.e. naval guards, where does the third-party liability lie? Again, it becomes a problem with regards to our insurances. I'm just going to go through this slide now to demonstrate the complications of what we have to do to embark our guys onto ships. And this is an example of the most recent ship that we've boarded, a 4-man team with arms, onto an oil major facility. So first and foremost, it takes months and months for due diligence for us to be checked, vetted, selected, put through our paces to make sure that we are fully compliant with what their expectations are, which include a number of site visits also. Once we get the approval from the due diligence that's been processed, this particular client wanted a minimum of four weapon systems, all to be 7.62 caliber. I apologise if that doesn't mean much to people, but I'll rather not dwell on it because I'm pushed for time. Minimum 800 rounds of ammunition. Again, this causes problems. So, for example, the Maldives will not allow more than 720 rounds of ammunition to enter into their waters. But then we've got oil majors saying that we need a minimum of 800 rounds per set, so you can see the complications there. For all the team, each stakeholder or owner has specific requirements of what he will accept. Some will accept mixed teams, some will accept various nationalities, some will only accept British, and that will obviously remain nameless. But again, it becomes complicated in what we provide. Documentary-wise, we must provide the following. Team leader training certificate. When did that team leader receive formal training for a team leader? For all the team, criminal record bureau checks. This particular client dated within 6 months. Again, that's caused its own inherent problems. All must be seafarer medically fit. All must have mental health assessments, particularly we've got guys which 99% of them are ex-military, who've seen conflict in Afghanistan, Iraq, and a number of other theatres that they've operated in. And they must provide a full CV, including biography, description of the experiences, both military and civilian, and the number of transits completed both for us as a company and other companies that they may have worked with. And the list goes on. What date they left the military, specific units and dates and combat tours that they were on, leadership experience, full description of jobs since leaving the military. STC 95, 4 modules is pretty standard now within our industry also. Maritime Security Operator Certificate, as I said before, the course that we sign up to is the Trident UK Maritime Security Operatives course, which is specific and bespoke to counter-piracy, anti-piracy services. Maritime Induction Programme, what was the induction process? And this all needs to be as part of that due diligence process that's been conducted on us. Maritime Firearms Training course, this is key. Never in 23 years of military service did anybody ever say to me, Mike, I want you to fire 5 warning shots at that target. It doesn't happen. We must do that as part of our escalation process within the training. So the training requirements for maritime firearms anti-piracy training is definitely different. So we must make sure that this training gap is filled. So the guys go do that course. And it's every 12 months and they must remain in date. Copies of their passports, military discharge certificates and medical training certificates. The reason why I put this slide up is to demonstrate that putting 4 guys on board a ship with 4 weapons is not an easy task. There's a whole training process that we must go through and documentary evidence. Okay, I'll briefly talk on matters arising. I was asked to sort of identify what are the main issues that we've got coming into our industry in the provision of maritime security. First and foremost is the ISO PAS 28007, part of the ISO 28000 series specifically for this industry. It's being driven by us, it's being driven by the private maritime security companies, and it's also being driven by others, but primarily we want the industry to be more professional, standardised, and make sure that we can make it easier for this due diligence process to try and adopt our services. Every time we take on a new client, we go through a new process, 6 or 12 months or 18 months. It costs money, it costs a lot of time, and everybody can do a more jointed effort if we've all got a single standard which maintains that we've got the bottom or the main minimum standard that we can achieve. It will provide a competitive edge, it will be recognised in the industry. It does demonstrate that we are best practice to this to the 28000 series and 28007. And ultimately, what we hope it will do is reduce costs. It will reduce costs for people to travel to our offices, us to travel elsewhere, and hopefully that will be a good thing for all. The next thing, it's already been mentioned, the Maritime Labour Convention. For us as security providers, if somebody said to me, yeah, Mike, we're going to make sure that your guys do a maximum of 8 hours per 24-hour period, what can we do? You know, he's just finished his 8-hour shift and we get attacked. Sorry, I'm not going to respond, I'm on my downtime. It's going to cause many problems, not just in terms of that, but you know, whether it's seafarers, supernumeraries, crew, it's a problem which I believe is not fully understood yet for us as an industry, and I think we do need to pay particular attention to it. And I know flag states have all got different views on how they're going to approach the NLC. As I say, flag states on board categorisation. Guards currently regarded as supernumeraries, or are they crew? The NLC enters into force, as most of you know, on the 20th of August, so it's literally a couple of days away. And I've mentioned there, signing members are sceptical. We've read a number of documents now, and we're members signing. We are sceptical. The final one I wanted to mention, which I think is a really positive and good approach, is the council regime, which is been mentioned already today. West African pirates now exceed those of their Somali counterparts. Something needs to be done in the Gulf of Guinea, and it needs to be a joint effort, not just Nigeria, but the whole of the region, in order for us to counter this problem. On the 24th, 25th of June, the summit in Yaoundé and Cameroon. Problem not that the rise in attacks, but it's the expansion of criminal activity, as I've mentioned a number of times. It's not the fact that there's been an increase in specific areas of attacks, it's the fact that it's now spreading in more regions. Okay, what do we believe the future is going to bring? We believe, and it's evident, that piracy is set to increase, and that is evident for all to see. In the past, there's been a lack of international response to the Gulf of Guinea, but now, in this year particularly, there seems to be more momentum in support, and conferences like this is a great way to step forward. A big issue, you know, what actually is going on down there? When we've got our intelligence departments, who are all ex-naval intelligence specialists, they're trying to pull on all the information to try and come up with the best information that they've got available. It's really, really difficult. Once we have an equivalent to UKMTO or MCHOA in the Gulf of Guinea, then it'll be a much better approach, and we can start managing risk in a much better way. Lack of reporting and a coordination centre. We need to know what's happening. It's really difficult to understand. So we can have a reporting centre which coordinates through the masters and the reports that are coming back. So we can do passage plans, we can advise on transit planning and everything else that goes with it. Increased area of operations, we've touched on it now on a few times. It's not increasing away from the land. It's different from the piracy in the Indian Ocean, where they've got no local support, they're at sea and they're on their own. It's different in the Gulf of Guinea. If they want to come out for a day and then go back home for a night, or come out and be brought supplies by their local criminal partners, it's easily done. So their logistics are a lot easier in the Gulf of Guinea than they are in the Indian Ocean. It's an unknown enemy. But they swap from different organisations to different organisations, and many of the audience here today will have a much better understanding here in the Gulf of Guinea than I will ever have. But we don't really know who's doing this, and that is also a problem. Increase in oil exploration, we believe, will increase in the number of attacks. And the final point really on the future of the Gulf is that the BMP4, which has been adopted for the Indian Ocean, the more and more that we spend in the region, the more it doesn't actually, we can push forward. I'm not sure if it's happening, but a BMP4, best management practice for the Gulf of Guinea, as opposed to in summary, choosing the right provider is costly and it is time consuming, but it's absolutely vital. There are that many companies doing things illegal. The piracy plan is ongoing. And finally, a collective response and partnering in all areas is a positive way forward and a better way of countering this massive issue which we're all now confronted with. That brings me to conclusion. If there are any questions, I'm happy to take them, but thank you very much for listening.
Mike, thank you very much indeed for that fascinating presentation. And even for those of us that are involved in this area of risk and safety that you're in, it was still very educational and very clearly identifies the hugely professional approach these guys are taking, and the regulatory pressures that they're under to make sure that they perform and that people don't get hurt in the wrong way. So thank you very much indeed for that. I've got some questions for you, as you might imagine. Yeah. I'll keep those until after the other speakers, so thank you very much indeed for that. So, moving on now, if by chance you don't have the right people on board your ship to protect it from pirates and you get involved in an oil spill, then our next speaker is the person that you need. And he's going to be talking on the impact of oil spills on the maritime sector and the need for preparedness and response. Yeah, preparedness and response. Very important. So, Mr. Hazlitt Beard from the Oil Spill Response Limited UK, we look forward to your presentation.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for inviting me. Okay, I'm going to be talking to you about what we're doing in oil spill these days. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the company and about how things have changed a little bit since the BP Macondo spill in the States. Basically, we actually operate worldwide. We're an oil spill cooperative. We're owned by 44 major oil companies, and we're actually a not-for-profit company. However, as my boss has regularly told me, we're also not for loss, so just keeping that there. We're actually the largest industry-owned company throughout the world, and we have bases in various locations. We're also involved these days in subsea well blowouts. And so we call this Swiss Subsea Well Intervention Service. And that was our members who basically said to us, you need to do something, can you coordinate something? We'll talk a little bit more about that. The membership in total is around about 160 oil companies. And because we are industry, we also find that we need to collaborate with regulators, with the IMO, and we do that through IPECA, which is the International Petroleum Industries Environmental Conservation Association, which is an association which is, again, a not-for-profit company owned or contributed by the oil companies. This is basically where we are. We're in the EMEA, Europe, Middle East and Africa, and we have an office here in London, up in Marble Arch, just to make it nice and easy for when people get off planes and get out of meetings, although we only have a few people there. Another office up in Aberdeen, mainly for the North Sea oil operations. And then down in Southampton, which is our main base, where we have almost 200 people working. This year, we've opened up a base in Cape Town. It's actually in Saldanha Bay, which is around 150 kilometres just north of Cape Town. And that's where we're keeping one of our subsea well intervention devices. And then if we go over to Asia Pac, we're in Singapore, we're also in Indonesia. And in the States this year, we've combined with a company called Clean Caribbean and Americas. So we have an operation in Houston, Fort Lauderdale, and we're just opening up another base in Rio. And it's a strange thing. We do basically what our members tell us to do. If somebody says it's a really great idea, we can make £10 million doing this. If the members don't want us to do it, we don't do it. And in this case, they wanted us to open up these new bases in these new locations. Things have changed somewhat over the years, and you can see we've been involved in all sorts of incidents in this country, Mozambique, even in Nigeria in 2011 with the Bongo spill. And I guess probably one of the latest ones there, which was interesting for us, was the Albion platform in the North Sea, which was actually a gas spill, a gas leak. And but we still had to be on standby for that. And in fact, I think we had people out for around about 7 months in the end. Things have changed. I was talking to somebody over lunchtime saying, well, you know, actually pre-2010, we were talking about maybe down manning what we were doing. The training was starting to drop off. Our members were not wanting so many people trained. They didn't want so many oil spill emergency plans updated. They didn't really see the need to have quite so many people working in the company until we had the Macondo spill, and it all changed. Literally overnight, people were updating their emergency plans, making sure that people were trained. And we've gone, in Southampton, as an example, for around about 125 people up to 200. Just since that time. So things changed with Macondo in 2010, and things really started to happen in 2011, where people said this really isn't good enough, we need to get our act together. What have we done? Well, you would have seen in Macondo, you maybe remember seeing the oil being put on fire. Yeah, it actually worked out as a very good way of removing a lot of oil quite quickly from the environment. The sea conditions were very, very calm, which means to say that when you spray things like dispersants, where you need a mixing action, the dispersant maybe wasn't quite as effective as maybe the burning of the oil. So different techniques were coming in. So we got ourselves some fire boom now. Some boom which you can set fire to the oil on the sea and the boom doesn't disintegrate. High volume skimming systems which we can take via our aerial platforms. We've also gone on to use a thing called ICS, the Incident Command System. And this is where we had people coming in from the likes of BP, from other oil companies, and they were operating a different system. So the Incident Command System is the same system and many, many oil companies now use this together. So I can go into BP, I can go into Shell. If they're using that system, I can fit into their structure. These are the guys that own us. I think you'll recognize a lot of those logos up there. Yeah, some big ones there, Total, Shell, ExxonMobil. Yeah, it's a rather large membership. These guys, we will respond to oil spills anywhere, anytime in the world. And we do, sometimes on a regular basis, other times not. And then we have another level of membership called associates, and they tend to be covered for one area or another. And you might see on there the, where is it? Gibraltar Port Authority, quite a small area, but they wanted membership, and every so often we go down when they have some small incidents, so we help them out. So a lot of oil companies there. How does that work? If you actually want coverage globally, you tend to get the participant membership. Those are the guys with the logos on the screen. But if you only want covered in small areas, limited areas, then you become an associate. Those are the guys with no logos. For all these guys, they get oil spill response 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If they have a spill, they can have a technical advisor come down free of charge. But for certain areas, people want some additional services, so we carry out supplementary services. And if I start with the North Sea, in the North Sea there's a lot of people drilling, and you have to have a Tier 2 service. So Tier 1, you have to have some equipment yourself. Tier 2, you look for somebody else to give you some support. And the members said, we like what that is. That's an aviation service for surveillance and for spray and dispersant. And actually, we'd like to replicate that in West Africa. So we have what we call the WACAF, West and Central Africa, aviation service there, based in Accra. And that covers from Senegal right the way down to Namibia. We're also doing that for East Africa, but because there is not quite so much action going on there, it tends to be more of an ad hoc service. So, since Macondo, what did we do? You probably remember seeing on the TV there were all sorts of containers and big boxes made